All right, what is up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Sovereign Hours. We have a really deep and special training today for you guys. And the reason why it's so deep and special and powerful is because most people think that marketing is about saying the right thing and making all these claims and lying to people and convincing people and pushing people, right? Well, that's more sales, but you know what I mean, right? The thing is, it's not. It's about saying the right thing to the right part of someone's brain at the right time. And tonight, I'm going to show you why most content gets ignored and exactly how to fix it. And so tonight we're going to be talking about selling to the ego. Now, if you don't know what the ego is, we're going to get into all of that. So don't need to worry. Strap in, take some notes because this is going to be a doozy. So the first thing that we need to understand is why should we even sell to the ego, right? Because most people will not accept new information if it doesn't confirm their current beliefs. Okay, I'm going to say that again. The reason why we want to get good at selling to the ego is because every person on earth will not accept new information if it doesn't confirm their current beliefs. And this is one of the many cognitive biases that we all have. And so this is a major problem for you, my friend, because your solution, aka the thing you sell, is perceived by the ego as new information. Okay, did you get that? The thing that you sell is perceived by the ego as new information. And so, how do you implant new information into your prospect's head without getting our friend Leonardo DiCaprio to do some inception type of shit? All right. How do we do that? Well, first we got to examine what is the ego. The ego is a cognitive function that emerges from a combination of genetic and life experiences. And the ego's main function is to keep us safe. And it does this by playing a timeline game with us by keeping us either in the past or in the future. And so, for example, anytime you feel depressed, it's usually because you're thinking about something that happened in the past. And anytime you're feeling anxious, it's because you're thinking about something that may happen in the future. Okay. So anytime you're thinking about something in the past, you're going to feel a little depressed. And anytime you're thinking about something that's going to happen in the future, you're going to feel a little anxious. Right. And so here's an example. You may say, I shouldn't have taken this job. Right. Or I shouldn't have married that person, or I shouldn't have gone on that date, or I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. This is an example of feeling regret about a past decision. All right. Then, we hear a lot of people, they'll say, I shouldn't have taken this job. Ugh. And then in the very same breath, they'll say, but if I quit, I won't be able to afford my bills and I'll be homeless. Right. And so they go into this spiral, right? And this is what we call a spiral because one thought leads to another thought, and then another thought leads to another thought, and it just gets darker and darker and darker and darker. And so that darkness is really created by the ego. And so the ego plays this timeline game with us so it can control us. And the reason it wants to control us is simply to keep us safe. And so this may sound good, but the unintended consequence of this is that if we're safe, then we never try new things. And if we don't try new things, then people will never try new products and services, right? And if they don't try new products and services, well, then they're not going to try our new product or service. And so the ego's goal is to keep us in the known world and keep us from the unknown world. Okay, I'm going to say that again. The ego's goal is to keep us in the known world and keep us from the unknown world, right? And this arises from millions of years of evolution, right? The pre-humans, right, called hominids, had to have some kind of cognitive function that prevented them from taking undue risk. Otherwise, the human species wouldn't have survived, right? Because they would have gone toward the fire instead of away from it, right? They would have gone over the mountain cliff instead of away from the mountain cliff, right? However, paradoxically, it is also going toward the fire, metaphorically speaking, that has also allowed the human race to not only survive, but thrive. And so right away, we can see that people naturally fall into different categories, right? Some people are risk takers and some people are risk averse, right? The problem is most people are risk averse, right? Less than 2% of people are risk takers. And these are the people who become entrepreneurs. The unfortunate thing is entrepreneurs don't have a large enough TAM, right? Total addressable market, to sell to other entrepreneurs. So we must sell to the 98% of people who are risk averse. And so, how do we categorize the population so that we can tailor our messaging for them? And so, this comes to a very important concept called the levels of control. Okay, the levels of control. And what that is basically what people believe caused their problems. Okay, and if you're like, why do I care what people believe caused their problems, right? Because if we can figure out what people believe caused their problems, then we can reverse engineer all of our marketing to speak to them where they're at. Okay. And we're going to get more into this concept a little later. But intuitively, it makes sense to speak to people where they're at. And my wife, she's a therapist, and they have a really beautiful saying, and it's speak to people where they're at. Right. And what does that mean? Well, it means speak to their ego with what their ego believes is the cause of all their problems. And so there's 4 levels of a locus of control, and we're going to cover the 4 levels right now. And so the first category is around concepts, right? And this category is where people blame their problems on concepts. Okay? And that may sound a little weird, but I'm going to explain what this means, okay? When we say people blame their problems on concepts, what we're referring to is things like the government, systems, countries, ideas, political systems, right? Like communism, capitalism, socialism, any ism, really, racism, sexism, the economy, time, right? Remember, time is a big one that the ego loves to use, right? And so these are all convenient things to blame because these are things that cannot be touched or changed. And the audience feels like a victim of circumstance, right? And so none of these things actually exist in reality, right? You can't go outside in nature and see capitalism. You can't go outside in nature and see time, right? You can't see the economy. You can't see racism, right? And so these are all things that exist in the human mind realm. Okay? So none of these things exist in reality, but they exist in the human mind realm. And if you're like, what the heck is the human mind realm, Andre? The human mind realm is basically everything that exists in our minds and doesn't necessarily exist in reality. Okay. And so you just click that. Okay. And so To be clear, and I should be very clear, I'm not saying racism or sexism doesn't exist, right? But where it does exist in the human mind realm, and it exists as a label, right? It's just a label to describe when a person or a group of people are oppressing another person or group of people based on their race, sex, etc., right? And so this is a label, right? Sexism is a label, racism is a label, the economy is a label, right? All these concepts are really labels. And the ego loves labels because it allows it to categorize things into two boxes, known and unknown. Okay. There's two boxes that the ego loves to categorize things into. It's very binary, right? There's the known box and there's the unknown box, right? And this known box and unknown box are proxies for safe and unsafe, right? So everything in the known box is safe, everything in the unknown box is unsafe. And that further becomes another proxy for good and bad, right? So everything in the known box is safe and good, and everything in the unknown box is unsafe and bad. Okay. And so this is very important because the ego is a labeling system that categorizes things into one of these two categories. All right. And so this brings us to our second level of our locus of control, which is things. Okay. And so this is where people point to specific tangible items as the source of their problems, right? It could be money, their computer, right? They don't have a good computer, right? Their geographic location, um, right? The clothes they wear, right? The glasses they have, the car they have, right? And so you may hear someone like, oh, I don't have the right computer. I don't have the right camera, right? I don't have the right microphone. I don't have the right equipment, right? I'm going to save up and get the right equipment. I'm going to get the lighting, right? Um, I need these physical things in order to do the thing that I want to do. And so while these tangible things are real things, they are still things that are outside of the person's immediate influence, right? So it's still a pretty convenient excuse. Oh, you can't make videos because you don't have a fancy camera, right? And so this brings us now to our third level of our locus of control, which is people. Now, people take slightly more accountability, but this is where they're blaming specific individuals or groups, right? Such as family members, partners, or if they're a business owner, they're blaming their incompetent employees, right? And so when we find people that blame other people, right, they're usually operating from the third level of locus of control. And so this is slightly better than blaming concepts or things because now they're getting closer to the real problem. And this is also important because we know that once the person's blaming the people around them, there's only one more person to blame. And this brings us to the fourth level of the locus of control, which is the self. And so this is the deepest level where the audience realizes that their situation is their own responsibility. And so they start blaming themselves, right? And particularly lacking a specific skill, and thereby can reclaim the control and power to fix their position. And so the goal with your marketing and sales is to move people through these levels, right? Move people from concept to things to people to self. Okay. So people are you're going to take them from concept, from them blaming concepts to blaming things to blaming other people to blaming themselves. Okay. And so when you hear marketers say things like, you need to increase time on brand, people need to spend time getting to know you, you need to follow the 7-11-4 rule, right? And if you don't know the 7-11-4 rule, Google came out with this research paper a while back, and it basically is a consumer behavior framework suggesting that buyers need 7 hours of engagement across 11 touch points in 4 separate locations slash platforms before they trust a brand enough to make a purchase. Okay. And so what this really means is just people need a lot of touch points with your brand and a lot of time with your brand in order to make a purchase, right? Because they need to build trust with your brand before they pull the trigger, right? And so what they really mean, okay? So what the marketers say is like the surface level stuff, okay? What you're getting here is a much deeper layer, and it's really going to unlock for you guys how to create your marketing materials, because what they really mean is you need to create marketing materials that speak to each level of the locus of control, and this is how you can sell to the ego without it minding too much, right? Without the ego being triggered, without the ego figuring out what you're doing, right? Because once the ego figures out what you're doing, it's going to put up the gates. It's going to say, no, we don't have time for this. No, we can't do that. We have the mortgage. We can't. Last time we did that, this is something bad happened. We can't do it, right? And you can see it. You can laugh. You guys are probably laughing because you probably recognize some of these excuses that you've heard from prospects or clients, right? And so, how do you diagnose where your audience is? Now, before you can write to each level, you need to know which level your audience is currently at. Okay. And when I say write to each level, what I'm referring to is your content, your ads, your workshops, your webinars, your sales calls, right? Anytime you're interacting with your prospects or your clients, okay? And so if you're like, okay, how do I know which level my audience is currently at? And the answer is already in your content, okay? And so what you're going to do is go look at your comments right now. Okay, not your likes, not your shares, but your comments. And comments are actually the most honest data point you have, because people only type when something hits close enough to provoke a reaction, right? And if you've been through the Dangerous Truths workshop, you know how to provoke a reaction and go viral and get a lot of views and get a lot of comments, right? And so here's what to look for in your comment section, right? So if people are saying things like, this is exactly why the system is broken, nobody talks about how rigged this whole thing is, right? If people say things like, the algorithm only helps people who already have money, right? You can see right away that they're blaming concepts, right? And so you can put two and two together and say your audience is at the concepts level, or these particular people who are commenting are at the concepts level. And you can take it a step further. The content that you're putting out is at the concepts level. Okay. It's speaking to the concepts that people blame for their problems. Okay. Great. You have the concepts part checked off. Okay. Great. If this is what's happening in your content, right? Because these people feel like victims of something invisible and untouchable. And so your job right now is not to tell them they're wrong. Your job is just to agree with the villain and then introduce a crack in the wall, right? And then that crack in the wall will be on another post that you have, right? Or in your comments or in your DM set, okay? or in your sales call, or in your workshop, right? Are you guys starting to see how this is like a timeline, right? And we take people through this timeline and these levels of the locus of control. And so let's take it to the second level now. So second level is things, right? And so if people in your comments are saying things like, I don't have the right equipment, right? Or I would do this if I had more time or money, right? Or I've tried every tool and software and nothing works, right? Your audience is at things, right? They're at the second level, which is things. And so they've narrowed the problem down to something specific, but they still believe the solution is external. And so this is actually good news because they're only one reframe away from your mechanism, right? Which is if people are saying things like, my last coach told me to do exactly this, and I did it, and it didn't work, right? They're blaming their last coach, right? Um, and this is a great market for a lot of you guys, because if you're in a market where people are blaming the last coach or service provider they worked with and things didn't work out, that's a great market to be in, right? Because those people are looking for someone to help them. Okay. And so they'll say things like, I've been burned by people promising results before, right? I don't know who to trust anymore, right? They'll say things like, I don't know who to trust anymore. And this is really good because now your audience is at the people level. They're blaming people for their problems now, right? They're not blaming the system anymore. They're blaming a specific source of bad advice, right? And so this means they're now open to a new authority, right? And they want some new advice. They want some new help, right? They're open. They could be open to a new authority, and that authority can be you, right? But you've got to build their trust, and you've got to speak to where they're at. And so this is a very important part in the marketing and sales process, because if you're getting people like this into your funnel and you're not closing them, it's because you're not able to do this last and final part, which is have people say things like, I know what I need to do, I just can't make myself do it, right? They say things like, I keep self-sabotaging, right? They say things like, what's wrong with me, right? And so if you've been able to put two and two together, we're now at the fourth level of the locus of control, which is the self, right? They're blaming themselves for their problems, aka they're taking responsibility for their problems. And so once people start taking responsibility for their problems, they can start actually solving them, right? And so an example is someone who's overweight, they'll blame their culture, they'll blame society, they'll blame the food, right, for poisoning them and making them obese, right? And there's some truth to that, right? There's really terrible food out here, really processed food, right? But everyone can pretty much be fit if they take responsibility, right, and figure out what's going on with them. And so this obese person, okay, so the obese person is first blaming society for creating this bad food, and then you take them through a process where now they're blaming um, the bad food in particular, like, oh, McDonald's, oh, those burgers and fries, they're lethal. I'm so addicted to them, right? I don't know if people will say that, but there's probably some people that say that. Oh, I love those chicken nuggets. Oh, I'm so addicted to those chicken nuggets from McDonald's, right? And so if you walk them through a process, you could get them to the third level, which is where they're blaming other people. And now they're like, my mom, she used to always bring home McDonald's after school, and she got me addicted to processed food at such a young age, right? You guys see where I'm going with this? And then finally, you get them through a sales call, maybe you get them on a webinar, and you take them through a process where they start to, say, you know what, my mom, she did the best she could with what she had. She was just a single mom, and really, I'm a grown adult now, right? I don't have my mom feeding me anymore. I'm the one feeding myself, and it's actually my responsibility to eat healthy foods, right? Don't eat McDonald's every day, right? Maybe me eating McDonald's every day is the problem, right? And so, as you can see, they are now taking responsibility for their actions, right? And this person is now ready to buy, right? Because they've done the internal work of accepting responsibility, and they just need someone to hand them the next step with confidence. And you, my friend, are the person that hands them the next step with confidence. Okay. And so you may be like, I don't have any comments yet, Andre. I don't know what to do. I'm not going viral, Andre. Please help me. Right. If you don't have comments yet, okay, use this instead. Go find 3 people in your target audience online, right? They could be in a Facebook group, on a viral Facebook post, right? You're going to see a lot of comments on viral Facebook posts. You can check out some of mine if you want to see some viral Facebook posts. You can check out some Reddit threads, right? Basically, go anywhere where people gather and talk honestly, okay? And make sure these people are your target audience, and read what they're complaining about. And then ask yourself one question: who are they blaming? Are they blaming a concept? Are they blaming a thing? Are they blaming a person? Or are they blaming themselves? Right. And that's your starting level, right? Because this is going to help you start seeing the messaging underneath the message, so you can create your marketing with more intentionality. And what I promise you is that this is basically like Neo in the Matrix. And if you haven't seen the Matrix, go watch it. It's a must. If you're in this sovereign hours, you need to watch the Matrix, right? That's your first homework. Basically, when you see this, you can't unsee this, because you're going to see this everywhere. And you're going to see the top marketers all using this to speak to people at different levels of the locus of control, right? And they do that to persuade them through each level of the locus of control. And so an easy way to understand this is basically, let's just like use a really basic example here. Okay, say you have an ad, say a Tony Robbins ad. Okay, a Tony Robbins ad, 99% of the time is going to blame some concept for the reason why you have the problem that you have, particularly if he's speaking to a broad audience. Okay. And if you don't know what a broad audience is, it's basically when he's trying to speak to everyone, right? So when he's trying to speak to everyone, you want to blame the problem on a concept, right? And so I think I saw a recent offer from Tony Robbins where he's selling AI training. I don't know how this guy's an AI trainer, but he's somehow an AI trainer. And the big concept is that AI is coming and it's going to disrupt the entire world, and you're going to lose your job, and the world and the sky is falling. Okay. Concept. It's a big concept. And so that's the first part of the marketing, right? It starts with the ad. Then you go to the landing page, and on the landing page, he starts to bring in things like things and a little bit of people, right? So he'll talk about um, how that money's tight right now for everyone, but the way you get more money is by doing AI, right? Um, then he'll talk about people like, oh, your boss, they don't want you doing this, right? They're going to be against you doing this because you're arming yourself and learning how to be independent, right? And then at the end of his close, he'll say something like, now it's like time to take responsibility for your actions. Click now and purchase, right? And so you guys can see how we go from like ad to landing page to webinar to pitch, right? And we take people through these levels of locus of control, right? And so what I want you guys to do is to kind of just start being aware of where these other marketers are using these levels of locus of control to control you and to persuade you, because it is really powerful. Okay. And so the next thing is, when you, where are we on here? Okay. So, and so the real purpose of all of this is so that you can write to each level, right? And you're probably like, okay, Andre, how do I write to each level? All right, I'm going to tell you. So most marketers make one fatal mistake, and they write all their content at the self level. And something I've noticed is, especially with beginner marketers, right? Beginner business owners, beginner coaches, beginner whatever, right? Anytime someone's a beginner, they're going to blame people at the self level, right? So all their content is going to be at the self level. And they'll say things like, you need better habits, you need to take responsibility, you are the problem, right? And they wonder why their content gets ignored, or people just call them an asshole in the comments, right? Or they even themselves feel like an asshole, right? They'll say things like, I I I don't want to, like, I don't want to put down my audience, right? Or right. And then when you tell them this stuff, they even have an aversion to doing it this way, right? And so for those people, and if you're one of them, that's totally okay. It's totally normal. Everyone goes through this process. Okay. Just hear this thing out. And when we're done, you can make your decision on if this is right for you or not. Okay. And so here's why that happens. Okay. If someone is at the concepts level, telling them it's their fault feels like an attack, right? If someone believes capitalism is the reason that they're poor, telling them, no, it's actually your fault, is an attack on their ego. And so once the ego activates, it's like the security guard turns on and they reject you and they leave. They don't want to have nothing to do with your message, right? And so this is where I see a lot of people, they will come out with the wrong message that attacks their audience, and they'll feel like they're being rejected for something external about them. Oh, the way I look, the way I sound, my accent, right? And it's really not that. It's really your message, right? What you're saying. And particularly, you're attacking your prospect, right? And remember, the number one rule of the Angle Matrix from the Dangerous Truths Workshop is, don't make your prospect the villain. Okay. And so what you have to do, and we've said this a million times throughout this program, is you have to meet them where they're at. Okay. And so for level one concepts, your content here names the villain they already believe in, right? um and this is all Dangerous Truth stuff, right? They'll say things like, the algorithm is suppressing small creators, the economy or capitalism is designed to keep the little guy broke, right? You're not lying, you're just entering their existing conversation that's going on in their head, right? Because this is what they believe. And if you're like, I feel like I'm lying to them because I don't believe this, I believe everyone's responsible for their own actions, right? The thing is, the most powerful thing you could probably say in this situation is, if you were them, would you do what they do? And the answer is yes. Right. And so you may have heard someone say this saying, it's super powerful. It's like, someone may say, "You're an idiot, Andre, you're such an idiot. You don't know anything about marketing." Right? Say someone says that to me. My response would be, if I were you, I'd feel the same way. Right? Because if I was them, if I was actually them, I would feel the same way. Right? If I literally became them, I would feel the same way, because I would have gone through the same experiences they have. I would have the same body as them, the same genetics, the same epigenetics, the same past, right? And so I would feel exactly like they do, right? And so what we're really doing here is radical empathy, right? Radical empathy is putting ourselves into their shoes and seeing the world through their lens, so that we can talk to them and hopefully change their mind so that they accept our new information. And our new information is our product or service. And so when we create content from their perspective, this is the type of content that gets the most shares, because it confirms what people already feel, right? And if you look at a lot of my content, this is what it does, right? My last post got like over 500 shares, which is not my record by any means, but a lot of my posts get, 200 shares, 300 shares, 500 shares. I think my post that has the most shares is like 10,000 shares. Okay. And so a lot of my content focuses on these concepts, right? And so when I create other content, I go to level two. Because if I want to move people along the timeline to buying my stuff and working with me, you got to move people along this timeline. And so the second part of the timeline, like we mentioned, the second level of the locus of control is things. And so this is now where you start shifting the frame slightly, right? You say things like, the algorithm isn't the problem. It's just that your content is giving the algorithm nothing to work with, right? You're still pointing out, you're still pointing outward, but you're moving the target closer to them, right? And so this is where you hear a lot of like mindset coaches, a lot of spiritual coaches, a lot of a lot of personal development coaches will blame your nervous system for the reason you are the way you are today, right? It's your nervous system that's causing you to tense up in those terrible situations and make bad decisions. It's your nervous system that's causing you to have this money block. And once you heal your nervous system, that money block will go away, right? What these personal development coaches, spiritual coaches, mindset coaches have done brilliantly is externalize the ego and call it your nervous system, so that you don't take any responsibility for blame for your life, right? It's your nervous system's fault. It's not your fault. It's your nervous system's fault, right? And so you can see this with like race baiters, right? They'll say like, "Oh, it's not your fault. You're poor. You're just a young black male, right? You're just a dark skinned man. You come here, baby. You're just a dark skinned man, right? It's not your fault, right? Let me take care of you, right?" And so this is where you introduce your mechanism now, right? The thing that they've been missing, right? And takes us to level three. And level three, as you guys know, is people, right? This is where people blame other people for their problems. And so they'll say things like, your coach gave you a strategy that works for someone with 100,000 followers, but you only have 400, right? And so you'll hear this a lot, where they'll name a specific external source of the problem. And this is really important, because this is where the trust deepens a lot, right? Um, because you're showing them you understand their specific situation, and it's not just some general ish anymore, right? Uh, imagine imagine them saying your coach gave you a strategy that works for someone with 100,000 followers, but you only have 400, right? You'll see like a fitness coach saying like, oh, oh, your last coach, those workouts were actually for like 20-year-old men who want to bulk up and have high testosterone. The workout you actually need is for a 45-year-old woman who's going through perimenopause, because this workout will actually work with your body and not against it, right? And so you can see how they're using these kind of this level 3 to differentiate, right? And speak to you. And their fitness program might not even there might not actually be such a thing as fitness programs for different ages and different genders, right? It's literally lift heavier stuff, right? That's literally the fitness program for everyone. Lift heavier stuff, right? Until you're like, I don't know, 70, 80, then don't lift as heavy. Just but keep lifting heavy stuff, okay? That's the universal workout program, okay? Just keep lifting heavy stuff. But if we said that, we wouldn't be able to speak to people where they're at, because people don't believe that, right? Most people don't believe that, right? And so this brings us to level 4, right? The self. This is where people start taking responsibility for their actions. And this is where buyers live, right? Because if someone doesn't take responsibility for their actions, they're not going to buy. And so by the time someone reaches this level through your content, they're not defensive anymore, right? And what does defensive mean, right? The ego is not so excited anymore, right? The ego security guard button, the security guard cameras in the ego's, security guard section they're turned on, but the ego's not looking at the cameras. He's like looking at a magazine right now. He's just scrolling on his phone, right? He's doom scrolling, right? And so when you're at level 4, right, and you've taken a person from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, they've already agreed with you 3 times, right? Remember the Tony Robbins example, right? Tony Robbins is a master at this. He takes people through each level of locus of control and eventually getting you to the pitch where you figure out that the problem is actually you're the problem and you need to take responsibility. And so when you say the only thing standing between you and the result you want is your decision today, it's going to land, because you've now earned the right to say that, right? This is very important. You have to earn the right to say certain things to people across a timeline. Okay. And so the real purpose of Google's 7-11-4 rule, right, is this: Google accidentally described a belief migration system, right? The 7 hours, 11 touch points, 4 locations, that's just enough exposure to move someone from concepts all the way down to self. And so most brands fail because they post the same message at the same level over and over and over. And they get stuck talking to people who already agree with them, right? And so your job is to create a content ecosystem where each piece of content pulls someone one level deeper, right? And so a way to think about this is like an elevator, right? Or a conveyor belt, where you're just taking people from the concepts level to the things level to the people level and then to the self level, right? Where they become a customer, right? And so what you'll have is like reach content at the top, right? Trust content in the middle and conversion content at the bottom, right? Remember, we always talk about top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. Well, this is the psychological layering of your messaging within those funnels, right? And so what this means for you guys tonight is 2 things, okay? Before you write your next post, ask yourself one question. Who am I talking to right now? Right? Am I talking to someone that's blaming the system? Am I talking to someone that's blaming their tools? Am I talking to someone that's blaming their mentor? Or am I talking to someone who's ready to look in the mirror? Right? And so what you want to do is match your message to that person and then watch what happens to your numbers. Okay? So this can get very advanced, but for now, if you're writing a post or an ad, you just want to stick to one of these things, right? So write a post that just completely blames the concepts, right? Write a post that completely blames the things, the tools, right? The tangible things that we can see. Write a post that blames the people in their lives, right? And then write a post that blames them, right? And again, watch what happens to your numbers. Watch how powerful your message becomes. And so what I want you guys to do, and the second thing I want you guys to do, is go look around at other people's content and audit their comments, right? You can do this on your own page if your stuff is viral, right? But if it's not yet, look at other people's comments and identify which level each one is at. And what I want you guys to do is once you do this auditing in the real world of looking at the 4 levels of where people are at, I want you to go into the school community, into our community, and let me know what you found, right? Put a link to the post and say, this post is speaking to people at the concepts level. This post is speaking to people at the things level. This post is speaking to people at the people level. This post is speaking to people at the self level, right? Because the power here is for you to start recognizing how marketers use this very powerful psychological framework to sell to the ego. Okay. And so that is it for this hour. It's been a super powerful hour. And I'm so glad that you guys joined me. I'll see you guys next week for another edition of Sovereign Hours.